Hi, I'm Mitch, and thank you for joining us on the Restoration Road. You know, Proverbs 22:11 says, "He who loves a pure heart and speaks with grace will have a king for a friend." In that verse is the secret to leading leaders. Loving a pure heart, that's a picture of how precious metal was refined and the impurities would come to the top and the refiner would remove them until they had the precious metal formed. And the deepest impurities wouldn't come to the top until the most time of intense heat, the greatest heat, brought the deepest impurities to the top. And the refiner would continue to remove those impurities until he would see his reflection in the metal. And that's what Solomon means when he's talking about loving a pure heart, one with unmixed motives, unmixed devotion, one that's fully surrendered to Christ. And then that affects our speech that is full of grace, undeserved love, unmerited favor. Our guest today has been refined in the hottest fire, and he is a leader of leaders. It's my pleasure for you to see how God has orchestrated the events in Scott Wise's life in order to advance his kingdom through the marketplace. Scott, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Our stories are so parallel. I remember when I walked into Scotty's in Fort Wayne and I read your menu and I emailed you immediately because you got at the bottom of this amazing story. Email me. And I emailed you. You emailed me
And
back
I answered
before I got my pizza. And you said, and let me know how good the pizza is. I thought, this is awesome. And I emailed asking if you would do a story with us, and you were so willing. And I just can't wait to get into it. You grew up in Muncie, right?
I did.
What was your church spiritual background, and how did you interpret it?
You know, I was raised Methodist. Good parents with just good moral convictions and values, but church was never the focus. It was never the center of our life. It was more what I kind of classify as Christian by convenience. You know, so we would go to church on the holidays, you know, Christmas and Easter and all the big ones. And I went to church camp. I was confirmed as a member of our church. But all that was kind of just dressing, like it didn't mean anything. I would go to church and I remember sitting in the pews and really concentrating and trying to make an effort to stay focused. And 5 minutes into a sermon, I was off thinking about what homework I needed to do or what friend I was going to play with or whatever. And so it was frustrating because I just didn't get it. I could not connect. And going into college, it became even further and more distant for me. It was never even top of mind. Again, Easter was probably even gone off the calendar. It was more just go to church on Christmas Eve and come home and open some presents the next morning. Mm-hmm. And so meeting my wife was probably the best thing that has ever happened to me. She is the one that brought me to Christ.
Wow. How did that happen?
As the kids got a little older, she said, you know, I know that you've grown a little way from the church, but I believe we need to put a moral compass into our children.
Wow.
Can we please go back and just find one? And I totally agreed with her. I said, you know what? I can sit through a service and be okay with daydreaming for the good of my children so that I know that they're getting put into the right hands. From the minute I sat down and listened to the first sermon, I'm like, wow, I get it. It took, God forbid, it took me about 35 years to find it, but I found it.
Wow. And you get baptized, but I want to now go back and see how God brought you to that point. You're in great shape. Were you an athlete in high school?
I was a swimmer in high school and college. And, you know, even with that, I had my issues. I was a kid that was always a little chunky and had a self-image problem. And so I was anorexic my freshman year in college.
Are you kidding?
No, I was a swimmer, so I was swimming. I would get up in the morning and I'd go run because I felt like I needed to lose more weight. And I'm a 6-foot guy that got down to about 130 pounds.
Oh my goodness.
Skin and bones and trying to swim, and it was just, I was miserable.
You had no energy, probably.
Nothing, no energy, nothing. So, but that part of my life, I got through it with good parents, and I would say, looking at the Lord today, back then I wouldn't have recognized it, that He was the one that was guiding me and leading me. But I think that's an important part of my life every day, is that I need, as much as I need spiritual healing, I think it's good for your mind and body and soul to have that, to get up and exercise at some point.
I like saying word worship workout. Start every morning with it.
I love that.
Because there's something about the word. Obviously, there's something about worship music with the beat to it that you like. It's got a direction for it, that's vertical. And then working out, and then I call that the inhaling. And then after you do all that, you exhale all day. You exhale the word, you exhale the worship,
and
then you work out your salvation.
That's
there
great.
You go. You can take credit for it. So God's drawing you to Himself. How did you recover physically from the anorexia?
So, my parents, the easy way was, they said, we're not paying for your college unless you start eating.
You hardly ever hear that, too.
So
it's usually the other way around.
No, so I tried to slowly start eating, and then I got the fact that I wasn't going to be a professional swimmer, and that wasn't going to be a career for me. So I transferred back to Ball State, and just had a good group of friends around me that kind of let me see that I was not looking great, and that I needed to just. So I think that's where I started compensating by. I would like to eat, but then I'd have to go work out, because I had to make sure that I was at least I wasn't obsessively working out. Mm-hmm. Well, my wife would tell you I'm a little obsessive, which I am, but
I am too.
And part of it is vanity, and I get that, but part of it is I just need it.
Yeah,
I need that.
I do too.
I need that centering. It just gets me. It's earphones, and it's me by myself, and kind of just thinking. And
man, we're so much alike. That's exactly what I think. Well, another way we're a lot alike is you tried, I think, for a year or so to be a marketing exec, and you said 9 to 5 isn't for me. Can you describe kind of what happened that first year or so?
I graduated Ball State in '95, and I left to go live in Texas. And I was always trying to get away from home. Again, I can look back now and I can see what I was doing. And I had big footsteps to fill. My parents were successful, and my grandparents. And I would go around town, and I was always known as Jerry and Debbie's son. I never had my own first name. I was always, hey, there's Jerry's son. And so I think that's why I was always trying to leave, to create my own name. And when I was
your dad well known because he owned a business?
Yeah, yep. He was very successful, very good, good community leader. Mm-hmm. And so when I was living in Texas, and I was working this day job that I thought was going to be my big career, my marketing career, I hated it. And I was bartending and waiting tables at night, and that's kind of when the light bulb flickered a little bit. And I thought, man, you've been doing this for the last 5 years. It was the one job that you always loved to do. Why not focus on that? And it was also a time where I kind of had the epiphany to say, quit running from your last name, embrace it. Yeah. Everybody's given these things in life, these breaks or these talents, and God has given you the ability to embrace that. Your father's worked hard, and his grandfather, and your mother, and go back to your hometown and do something with it.
Are you starting to take steps then to open your first restaurant?
Yeah, so I came back to Muncie, and I was working for my parents, and I was living at home, rent-free. My mom's doing my laundry again. Of course, I feel like a sap because I'm doing that. And I started writing up a business plan. And my dad said, if you really want to do this, write up a plan. We'll take it to a bank. I'll co-sign the loan if you've got a good plan and they approve it, and you can do it. These values that he taught me, little ones like, when we would go to the office, we'd ride in his truck, and he would park so far from the front door, and there'd be spots right by the front door. And I'd go, Dad, you own the company. And he said, son, you are no better than anybody else. You stay humble and have humility, and your people, your employees will respect you and love you even more, knowing that you will pick up a mop right beside them and work just as hard right beside them. So I wanted to create my own destiny. I wanted to own my own business. I knew that my God-given talent was, not that I still don't think I'm a great restaurant guy. My ability is the ability to be able to lead and motivate and pull. When you think you've done all you can do, I think I can get a little bit more.
Amen. I could see that in you big time. That's obvious.
So you
go back to Muncie.
Put the business plan together.
Yep.
I went into the bank. We got approved, and I got in there, and I just bought a bunch of Murphy's oil soap and a bunch of cans of paint, and we cleaned it up. My now wife and my sisters and my parents got in there with me, and I was in about 1,000 square feet building. It was an old rundown bar, but it was at the corner of Main and Main, where our original still stands today. And I was the bartender and the cook and the waiter, and the story just grew. And I had all kinds of success that really a 22-year-old should not have, especially in this business where there's a high rate of failure. I'm young, so then I think I'm invincible. So then I opened restaurant number 2.
This happened to me.
And 3 years of just, I lost $1 million. I'd cry at night, not knowing how I was going to pay rent, and it was probably one of the worst times in my life. But I savor it because it stays down in my belly because I know that I never want to go through that again.
That feeling of helplessness for somebody that's wired like we are is just about drives you insane.
And I had no God in my life then.
Yeah.
I had nothing to really pray to or point to. It was just me thinking that I had to control everything. It took me almost 8 years to pay back the $1 million that I lost.
Did you do that with one restaurant, the original one?
No. So the beauty of being young and stupid and losing $1 million is who wouldn't want to just pick up everything and go open another restaurant? So that's what I did.
No kidding?
Yeah, so I took all the equipment from the restaurant that I failed at, and I went and looked down in Bloomington for our second location. For the Scotty's model was still working.
Yeah.
While that other one was struggling. And so I said, I
want to ask you who you owe. Do you owe the bank, investors, vendors, all the above? Okay.
And I had my dad there that was, the $1 million probably doesn't account for the money that I'm sure he forgave and threw my way and helped me out with, and my parents are my 2 biggest heroes and cheerleaders behind my wife in my life.
So that's awesome. So you go to Bloomington.
I go to Bloomington, and I was told, if you can make it here, kid, you can make it anywhere, because this town is tough, and it is. It's a tough town. It's a foodie town, and we came in at the time when the world was allowing smoking in all restaurants, but Bloomington was progressive. They said from here on out, this is back in 2000, you have to be smoke-free if you open a new restaurant, but any old restaurants can still have smoking. And I didn't care. I'm not a smoker, so I thought this will be cool. This will be a niche, and it was. And it made us even more popular because people could come in, and there was not the cloud of smoke that was over the restaurant.
So that helps you get the money back.
It helps. Yeah, it helps. For me, it wasn't even about the money.
Right.
I was just doing it because I needed the growth. I needed for me that type A driven person. It's funny. I always equate it to Bobby Knight. I remember the great, I'm an IU fan. I love when he was coaching. I don't love all the ways he was coaching, but
right.
I remember in an interview, they said, it was right after he won a championship, and they said, once you win, how long do you savor it before you start thinking about next year? And he said, I've already started recruiting. And it's, it's something that I constantly have to challenge myself to back off of, because I remember back when I had one restaurant, I thought, when I get to 3, I've become something. And then I had 3, and I'm like, you know what? I think 8 is the number. And currently, right now, the number to me is 22.
And where are you right now?
And I'm at, by the end of April, we'll be at 18.
And where are all those?
Oh, gosh. We've got all over Indiana, Bloomington, Muncie, West Lafayette, Mishawaka. We have about 5 in Indianapolis on about every side of Indianapolis. This is the first time we're going out of state. We're going out to Punta Gorda, Florida.
Oh, yeah.
So of course instead of being logical and doing a 1-state jump, I'm taking a 5-state jump. But we found a great location on the water down there, so we're opening there in March. I'm opening one in Champaign-Urbana at the University of Illinois next April.
Do you take partners, or how do you know you're going to have the management like you in each one of those?
That's the toughest part about growth, is that I've always wanted to be the anti-chain. I hated the big guys when I was growing up, and I never wanted to be like them, because I would walk into any chain restaurant and I'd look at the employees kind of just dazing, and the stuff on the table was gross, and because there was no direct management, there was no ownership of it.
Yeah.
And it's tough. It's tough to find people that want to run. No one's going to ever run something the way you run it, right? I mean, that's what we're here for. And so I try to constantly put my culture, my personality. I think culture is a buzzword. It's really personality. My restaurant is me. It's my blood, it's my tears, it's my sweat, and it filters through all of my management. So if my top tiered management believe in what I believe in, then that kind of trickles down. But like your blood gets thinned out with water, you know, so the bigger we get, it gets a little thinner. So I think that the internet, as kind of bad as it can be, the beauty of it is it's made our world and even business a little smaller.
Yeah.
So just like you started this conversation with, I still can connect with people through the internet. Now it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And unfortunately it takes a lot of time and my eyes away from maybe my family or God or things that are important to me. And I tell myself just one more year or one more restaurant, or once I get through all this, then I will. And I try to remember that. You know, I think that's the biggest struggle for me, is to try to remember that business is helping me do something else. It's not, I'm not,
it's
I'm not,
a vehicle or a tool.
It's a vehicle. And that's what I think that God, what He has given me is not the ability to serve excellent burgers and fries and drinks. That's just the soapbox that He's given me to stand on, to profess my faith and doing good and giving back to the community. I feel like, you know, what He's given me and is giving that hand up to those people that need it. And so that's...
It helps that the bison burger is out of this world.
It is a delicious burger.
God has worked with you in many ways, I think, to draw you closer to Himself, and not all of those have been fun. I think in order of events, it was your retina first.
My retina detached.
And then the brain infection. I'd like you to talk about those two.
So I think God taps on your shoulders, kind of or whispers, and if you don't listen, He gets a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah.
And I was busy. I didn't have kids, and I was not slowing down. I wasn't listening, and I think my wife, I was pushing her further away, and my retina detached. And it was a very miserable time in my life. It was painful. I couldn't work. I didn't know how I was going to sign paychecks. And we got through it. You know, it was God saying, listen, things work out. You know, just listen to me and follow my plan. But at that time, there was no church for me. I still wasn't back to the church. And all I saw it was a way to get me to slow down a little bit and a bump in the road. And it was something I needed to overcome. I needed to be strong and fight through it, because it's me against everybody.
Do you know what caused it?
Genes, genetics.
Oh.
I think a little bit of that and bad luck. It wasn't I didn't get hit in the head, and it wasn't anything like that. It was just I've always had bad eyes. And I kind of like that so as a swimmer, it's a sport that's one-on-one, right? You know,
Yes.
it's not a team. I mean, it's a team sport. You go and win as a team, but I was a long-distance swimmer because I wasn't the greatest even swimmer. But man, I had a lot of heart. My dad taught me early on. He was a wrestler, and he was a tiny guy, but he had the heart of a lion. And I think that's what they gave me, is that drive and that desire. And I think that same thing even happened with when my eye happened. And so, you know, I fought through it.
You were face down for 10 days?
Face down for 10 days. I remember when it happened, I was at work, and I drove home, I thought my contact was just foggy. I kept popping it out and trying to clean it, and it wasn't getting clean. And so I called my retina doctor. At the time, I had a retina doctor because I was keeping an eye on things because my eyes were so bad. And I remember laying down in the office, and he said, his word, I'll never forget, he said, "I told you to call me if it got bad." Oh. And I'm like, that can't be good. So I remember crying, calling my mom right away and my wife, and just saying, I need your help. Things aren't good. And because gosh, you think about losing your vision. I mean, that's how beautiful the world is. Yeah. I mean, I've always soaked in sunsets and sunrises, and I do it even more today. I try to take a minute to just watch. And because I think that we take so much for granted in life until something's taken away.
Yes.
You don't know how great you have it.
Yes.
And so that all happened, and I have to get I remember seeing a needle getting cut. Think of a needle coming right in your eye, and he's holding your eyelid open, and so he tries something and it doesn't work, and so I had to go in for surgery, and they repair it. But the worst part is the recovery. So I had to lay face down for 10 days, sleeping, watching TV. I had a specially made chair that I looked into a mirror and watched TV through that, upside down. I couldn't work. I caught up on a lot of great Netflix shows, but
a little bit like
horrible.
Paul going blind for 3 days. You get to see inside a little bit.
Yes.
So you get healed up, and sometime later you get a mosquito bite. Is
So
that right?
even before that, I think it's important to say that I didn't know if I wanted kids, and I said, you know what, if God wants it, then it will happen. My wife and I had a good conversation about this, and thank God he did 4 times over, because it changed my entire world and my life. And like I said, it brought me to church, which was just so awesome. And it's important to tell this before the mosquito, because I remember sitting in church watching the first water baptism. You know, I was baptized as a child, and then to see it happen, you know, just because as a child, I was a baby, and so it got done because it was what you were supposed to do. But to do it by choice and watch these people go across stage and profess their faith and what brought them to that was so, every time they do it, it's so moving, and I'm waterworks. And so I said to myself, I want to do that. I told my wife, but you know what, every time they say, we have a sign up, I was just too busy. It was always just, let me do one more thing, or I'll get to it next time. And then I'm on vacation about 3 years ago, and I'm down in Hilton Head with my family, and we're on our way home. And the flight is delayed, which you'd think, if this would have happened when I was on the airplane, I don't know if I'd be here talking to you. Thank you, God. So the flight is delayed. We go to a restaurant, and I start I thought I was having a heart attack because my whole left side is numb. Now I know I was having a seizure, and I couldn't talk. I was trying to pay the bill, but I couldn't get my wallet out of my pocket. And my wife called a friend of mine who's a doctor, and he said, put him on the phone. And I tried to mumble to him and talk, and he said, hand it back to your wife. And I handed the phone to him, and he said, get off the phone with me right now and call 911. And so I was in a hospital in South Carolina for about 2 weeks, a teaching hospital. I don't blame the students, but they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And they just kind of let me go. They said, we've ran every battery of tests and we can't figure it out. So they let me go. And I flew back to Indiana with my father, and I go to home that night, and I wake up at 2 a.m, and I'm having the same feeling in my left hand, and it's going numb. And I wake up my wife, and I say, it's happening again. And she calls the 911. And man, you just see these, the cliched, seeing the flashes of your life.
Yeah.
It's all happening. You know, I'm sitting there, and it's like a film strip. You're seeing yourself as a kid, and then you're seeing yourself playing sports, and your wedding, and the birth of your children. And I remember they had me get on the gurney, and it was so cold. And they got me into the ambulance, and it's 3 a.m, it's cold, and I remember looking, I'm on my back, and I'm seeing these flashing lights just going around, and all I could think about was, how's my wife gonna run the house without me? Who's gonna walk my daughters down the aisle? Who's gonna teach my son how to shave? And why didn't I get baptized? Why was it so important to just do one more thing? And I remember my last kind of clear thought of consciousness was, God, if you get me out of this, I promise that I will be first in line for baptism, and I will change my ways. And I remember in the hospital waking up to my mom's face, and she said, hey, how are you? And I said, Mom, I got to get home and get dressed. We got a party to go to tonight. My good friend just got married. And my mom said, honey, that was a week ago.
Oh my goodness.
And so I survived, man. I made it. I had viral encephalitis, and it was learning now that it's a pretty scary disease that not everybody comes back from with their full capabilities. And And I walked right into church right after. It took about a month and a half to get out of there. And I went into church, and the first church sermon that came out was, "We're signing up for baptism today."
Oh my goodness.
And I put my name on the list.
You remembered your promise.
Yep.
And you got baptized, and you treat that as a new spiritual awakening in your life, and you're even more about others than you ever were before. I'd like you to just briefly tell us how you start your day now.
I get up every morning and I pray. I wake up at 5:30, depending on how many times I hit the snooze. I'm not I'm not allergic to the snooze button. But I have a room in our house that I love to go just sit in, and I start with a prayer. And I thank God for all the things that He's given me every day. And then I read the Bible, I read a book called The Story first, and it was such a great way to because the Bible is difficult. I mean, maybe not for you, but for me, it's hard to get through. And so The Story was great because, put it all in chronological order, and it puts it in a way that you can read it.
Yeah.
So now when I read Corinthians and I'm trying to get through it, I can remember back to when I was reading the story.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So I balance that with, I get introduced to My Purpose-Driven Life is a great book that I read little chapters of in the morning. The Blessing is a book that I love that just is so good about being a parent and what you should be teaching your children, and so that is a way that for me gets my day started right, even when things are bad, because we all, just because I've had my shares of struggles, they're not ever going to go away. I think God gives us these things as ways to either grow or enlighten us or correct us, put us, when we stray a little bit, He's there to kind of tap us back on the path. So reading that helps center me every morning. Church on Sundays, our pastor is so good about saying that you need church on Sundays, but it's not the only thing. You're getting pulled in so many different directions all week that church kind of brings you and centers you again. And sometimes I wish church happened more often than once a week.
Yeah.
And it can.
Yeah.
It can. Just
what
with
you're
that
doing every morning.
Yes.
And then you make breakfast for your kids.
And then I make breakfast for my kids, and I follow your regimen. Then after I'm done and the kids go to school, then I go work out, and I get that out of the way, and then I go into work and I'm ready to
That's awesome.
attack the day.
Scott, you're an amazing human being. I just can't wait to see what God does next with you. I can't thank you enough for sharing your story with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.